He stood barely 5 feet tall, wore his pants up to his chest, and made millions laugh without ever cracking a smile. But behind the suspenders and the banjo was a man you never really knew. David Stringbean Aikman wasn't just a country comedian. He was a living contradiction. A man who could bring a stadium to tears of laughter, yet barely trusted a soul. By the early 1970s, he was everywhere. Grand Ole Opry, hee-haw, TV sets across the country. He had that rare kind of fame that didn't require billboards. Just his grin, his twangy banjo, and that warm, slow Appalachian charm. But Stringbean wasn't like other stars. While Nashville's elite bought Cadillacs and lived in mansions, he drove a plain old station wagon, chopped firewood in the mornings, and lived in a 2-room cabin tucked deep into the hills of Tennessee. No bodyguards, no fences, no cameras, just him, his wife Estelle, and a whole lot of secrets hidden inside their walls. Literally. He was famous, yes, but paranoid, cautious to a fault. And the reason why would become clear on a night so horrifying it would change country music forever. See, Stringbean wasn't just frugal, he was obsessed with security, not the modern kind, but old-school, Depression-era, bury-it-in-the-backyard kind. He didn't trust banks, not one bit. And who could blame him? He came from a time when banks collapsed overnight and families lost everything, so he handled things the old way, cash only and cash everywhere. Word around Nashville, whispered backstage, passed around late-night jam sessions, was that Stringbean kept tens of thousands of dollars hidden inside his cabin, not in a safe, not even under a mattress. We're talking coffee cans buried under floorboards, envelopes behind bricks in the chimney, bundles of old bills stuffed inside picture frames. Some thought it was just legend, a tall tale for small-town talk, but to a couple of desperate men, it sounded like an invitation. And that's where the danger crept in, because if everyone in town knew about Stringbean's hiding places, who else was listening? Who else was planning? Because on one cold November night, those rumors became blood-soaked reality, and the gentle man with the banjo became the victim of one of the most shocking murders in country music history. Every Saturday night, like clockwork, Stringbean Aikman performed at the Grand Ole Opry. And every Saturday night, he and Estelle made the same quiet drive home through the back roads of Ridgetop, Tennessee. No bodyguards, no entourage, no locked gate. Just two people in love, heading home to their little cabin in the hills, the same way they always had, for years. And that was the problem. They were predictable. That small-town rhythm, that innocent routine, became their greatest vulnerability. Because while Stringbean made America laugh, someone was watching. Someone who didn't see a beloved performer, they saw a payday. They had heard the rumors. They had mapped the routine. They knew where he'd be, what time he'd get home, and how far away help would be in those dark, rural woods. And on November 10th, 1973, while Stringbean was on stage entertaining the world, two men broke into his home and waited in the dark. They weren't fans. They weren't friends. They were predators, armed, angry, and hungry for the fortune they thought was hidden behind the walls. John Brown and his cousin Marvin didn't just want to rob a man. They were ready to kill him. Midnight, cold, quiet Tennessee air. The Aikmans' car pulls into the driveway like it had 100 times before. They had no idea they were driving into a trap. Stringbean opened the front door and never made it past the threshold. A single shot echoed through the cabin. He collapsed immediately, dead before he hit the ground. Estelle, hearing the blast, ran from the car, screaming, purse still clutched in her hand. She didn't stand a chance. One of the men shot her in the back as she ran toward the house, desperate to help her husband. She fell outside, in the dirt, just feet from the man she'd loved for decades. No one heard them cry for help. No neighbors saw the flash of the gun. And by the time the sun rose, two legends of country music were lying in pools of blood in their own front yard. And the worst part? The killers left with almost nothing. They ransacked the cabin, tossed drawers, tore up floorboards, but the cash they so desperately wanted? They missed most of it. Tens of thousands of dollars, hidden so well it would take decades to be discovered, were still tucked away behind bricks and walls, untouched. Stringbean and Estelle died for a rumor, for a myth, for money that was right under their killers' noses, and yet completely invisible. What came next was outrage, confusion, and a storm that shook country music to its core. The murders rocked Nashville to its knees. Stringbean wasn't just a performer, he was family to the country music world. His death didn't just feel like a loss, it felt like a betrayal. A safe, quiet world had been shattered. Grandpa Jones, one of Stringbean's closest friends, was the one who found their bodies. The image haunted him for the rest of his life. He never truly recovered. In interviews, his voice would crack, tears forming when he tried to talk about that night. Fans were devastated. Fellow Opry performers were shaken. How could something so violent happen to someone so kind, so harmless? And then, quickly, there was a break. Police zeroed in on John Brown and Marvin Brown, two local cousins with rap sheets full of petty crimes, and a sudden suspicious surge of cash just days after the murders. Neighbors had seen them bragging, flashing money, telling stories. The connection was too strong to ignore, and once John Brown was in custody, it didn't take long. He cracked. His version of events was shaky, full of holes, but it was enough. The story came out. They had planned the robbery, knew where the Aikmans would be, waited in the shadows, and when the couple walked in, they pulled the trigger. Cold, calculated, heartless. In court, the prosecution laid out a brutal timeline. The Browns didn't panic. They waited. They had weapons. They had a plan, and they had no intention of leaving witnesses. The courtroom was packed with friends, fans, and grieving musicians. The trial didn't just feel like justice, it felt like closure. Or at least it was supposed to. John Brown was sentenced to 2 life terms. Marvin, who testified against his cousin, got a lesser sentence. Some called it justice. Others said it wasn't nearly enough. But at least the story was over. Or so they thought. Fast forward over 40 years. John Brown, the man who ambushed and murdered 2 beloved figures in cold blood, was quietly granted parole in 2014. You could practically hear the outrage rumble through Nashville. Grandpa Jones's family spoke out. So did fellow Opry performers, surviving friends, and fans who had never forgotten. How could this man walk free? He didn't apologize. He didn't express real remorse. In fact, during his hearing, he gave a vague, emotionless version of the events, one that barely acknowledged the lives he had destroyed. There was no real regret, no responsibility, just indifference. And that's what cut deepest. Because this wasn't just about punishment, it was about principle, about memory, about respect for the lives that were stolen that night. For the Aikmans' loved ones, Brown's release felt like justice was being undone. A cruel reminder that time may pass, but wounds this deep, they never heal. And maybe most disturbing of all, he never get. For years after the murders, one rumor never died. People whispered about it backstage at the Opry. Old fans muttered it over bar stools in Nashville bars. Even police officers couldn't shake it. There's still money in that cabin. See, the Browns had flipped every drawer, torn apart furniture, even ripped up floorboards looking for cash, and left with barely $200. But Stringbean had been hiding money his whole life. People believed thousands, maybe tens of thousands, were still buried in that house. And then, in 1996, more than 2 decades after the murders, the legend became real. Workers renovating Stringbean's old cabin pulled a loose brick from the chimney, and behind it, $20,000 in cash, rotting and decayed, but untouched since the 1970s. Bills were so old they were barely usable, but the message was clear. The rumors were true. The killers hadn't even come close to finding it. And suddenly, a chilling thought crept back in. What if someone else had known exactly where to look and got there first? What if the Browns were just the fall guys? Police had closed the case, yes, but now it didn't feel so closed. Fans started asking hard questions again. Had someone tipped the Browns off about the money? Did they kill for something they never even found? Was there a third man, someone smarter, someone quieter, who got away? Even today, those questions have no clear answers. But one thing's for sure, Stringbean's fear of banks wasn't paranoia, it was reality. And in the end, it may have cost him his life. Despite the horror, despite the unanswered questions, Stringbean Aikman's story didn't end with a bullet. Because what he built during his life, it still matters. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't chasing headlines. He didn't care about fame. What made him special wasn't just his music. It was his honesty, his humility, his humanity. He lived like it was still 1935. Gardening, chopping wood, walking into town like any regular man, and that made people love him even more. His banjo style, old-timey, Appalachian, raw and heartfelt, shaped a generation of bluegrass and country performers. His comedy, simple and warm, still makes people laugh today. You can hear echoes of his charm in modern country acts who never even met him. He wasn't trying to be a legend. He just wanted to be himself. And that's exactly what made him one. After his death, friends like Minnie Pearl, Grandpa Jones, Roy Acuff, and others campaigned to preserve his legacy. A special tribute exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame was created. His banjo was displayed. So were his costumes, his photos, his memories. But even in all those tributes, one feeling after the murders, Nashville changed. It wasn't just a crime, it was a wake-up call. For decades, country stars had lived like neighbors, not celebrities. They left their doors unlocked. They shopped at the same grocery stores. They sat on porches with fans who just wanted a handshake. But after that night in 1973, all of that shattered. Country musicians started locking their gates, installing alarm systems, hiring private security. The easygoing charm of the Opry crowd, gone, replaced by fear, suspicion, and grief. The murder of Stringbean didn't just take 2 lives, it killed an era. And the cruelest irony? The Browns walked away with almost nothing, less than $200. That's what 2 lives and an entire town's innocence were stolen for. What they really took was bigger than money. They stole a sense of trust, of community, of safety, and maybe something even darker. Because the question never really died. Did they act alone? Did someone else know where the real money was? Did someone, somewhere, profit from the deaths of 2 good, humble people and get away with it? Even now, that question still hangs in the Tennessee air like smoke. Stringbean's murder has an official ending. 2 men arrested, 1 dead, 1 paroled. Case closed. But emotionally, spiritually, the story never really ended. Because the more you learn about Stringbean, the more heartbreaking his death becomes. He wasn't after fame. He didn't crave riches. He just wanted to play his banjo, love his wife, and live a quiet life. He had no children, no massive fortune, no security team. Just old tools, old habits, and a heart full of music. And maybe that's why his story still cuts so deep. Because he was real, genuine, the kind of man America used to be built on. He lived humbly and died tragically. But he left behind something more powerful than any fortune. A legacy of laughter, a soundtrack of banjo strings and Appalachian soul. A reminder that sometimes the kindest people leave the deepest marks. He didn't need a mansion to become a legend. He didn't need millions to be unforgettable. And in the end, that's what makes Stringbean's story worth remembering. Because no matter how dark the crime, no matter how cold the killer, the music still echoes.